welcome to another edition of Just Read It. As you may see, our audience, or our participants are a little different. Susan Stoner, my co-host, has gone off to other more exciting things in life. I'm holding the fort, but it gives me an opportunity to introduce you to a couple of more Portland writers, and that will be our format in the future, just me and two great writers. My writers today, starting at my far left, is Dan Burns. And Dan, you've written a book. Could you show us and tell us this a little bit?
This is The Gods of Second Chances through Forest Avenue Press. It's about a fisherman who's digging out a living in Alaska, and he's very superstitious, and he's raising his granddaughter because his daughter's been in jail for meth for 12 years, and when the granddaughter's about 11, she comes back as a born-again Christian wanting to wreak havoc in their lives.
And I have read your book. I think we did a review of yours, and it's a great book and a great read. So thank you for sharing that with us. And second guest, Suzy Vitello, who has been with us before. She's an old-timer too. And Suzy, about your book.
Thanks, Carolyn. So my book is a young adult book called The Moment Before. And it was my debut, and it's kind of its 5-year anniversary. And it's an exploration of sibling grief through the eyes of a teenager whose older sister died tragically in an accident. And they were quite different. They were born only 11 months apart. They were kind of that Irish twin kind of situation, but they were vastly different. And so through her exploration of her grief, she's sort of understanding a little bit more about who her sister was, and then we get into this whole idea of like what really happened and what were the circumstances behind this alleged accident that happened.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of a mystery.
All right. Well, before we start, let me ask you, you're both working on new material?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, another fiction?
Another fiction takes place in the late 30s in Eastern Oregon this time.
Eastern, okay.
Yes.
Oh, I'm glad you got out of Alaska. It's not my favorite place. And Suzy, how about you?
Well, coincidentally, mine also takes place over the mountains in Oregon, in rural Oregon, but it also takes place in the Norse mythology underworld. So it's also a young adult book, and it's a bit of a portal contemporary fantasy.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. More to come, audience. And save your money to buy these books. Well, today we're going to be discussing New York Times bestseller, and it's Barbara Ehrenreich's Natural Causes, which is not fiction, but I don't know what your response was, but when I read about the human body, I certainly thought I was in another world. Dan, give us your thoughts about the book.
Well, it's basically Barbara's take as she gets older about how is it that we're supposed to face death, right? And she's very much against a lot of the fads that go on, all the things from everything from mind, body awareness to meditation and things, those things that sort of promise you that you can live forever. And her background as a scientist, as someone who has studied things like white blood cells, macrophages, and how they actually behave in the body, do not sustain the actual scientific evidence. So it's really quite her manifesto as forget all that stuff, live your life as you want to live it, and accept death as it comes.
All right.
And possibly drop some acid along the way.
That's right.
Which she does suggest.
Spoiler alert. Whoops, I guess I should have said that before.
She went to Reed College, which was my alma mater.
There
You
you
could
go.
expect
There you go.
nothing less.
Yeah.
But give us your take.
Well, she sets it up, it's a polemic. It says right there in the flap copy. So, there are no answers here. There's no information that's going to lead you to a happier, healthier, better life. It's, not a self-help book at all. And her relationship with cells comes from her study of them.
She has a PhD.
She's a PhD in cellular immunology. And she studied macrophages back when they were the good guys, she says, because they help support a healthy body, and, they're part of the immune system, healthy immune system. But the way that they turn on the body in some circumstances like cancer and so forth, those chapters were hard to read for many reasons, you know. Nobody really likes to read about the fact that there's some mysterious thing that could unleash itself in your body at any moment and take you down. You know, I much preferred the chapters where she was more of a participant in that rather than lecturing, you know. So I had an uneven relationship with the book, but it was interesting.
It was breathtaking, though, because I liked the idea that, well, I didn't like the idea that some parts of our body that we thought were protecting us aren't. She uses the analogy, it's like hiring firefighters and finding out half of them are arsonists.
Yes.
Wow, you know, that's a little depressing. But she does end up with this psychedelic response to life, you know, drop a pill. I mean, do you agree with me? I mean,
I do, yes, and part of it, I think, is I agree with Suzy. I had sort of mixed feelings about it, and I enjoyed a lot of it. I think when she's at her best is when she's being personal in her personal stories, but she paints with a very broad brush against doctors and a medical establishment, which she claims is not so much based on scientific evidence, but more along the ritual mystique of, oh, there's someone in a white lab coat, and people need these rituals of going for their annual exams, going for their mammograms. And I think that, and to some extent she's right, but she sort of misses, you know, some of the broader issues if she's going that way, like, well, a lot of people in this country do not have access to good health care at all.
Yeah.
So what about that? You know, that's going to actually, you know, impact your your life expectancy.
What did you think about
degree.
that?
I thought that's interesting because, you know, one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time is Nickel and Dimed. And she really is an advocate for, you know, the lower income minimum wage person in that, and actually took a job at Walmart so she could see what it was like from the inside out and all of that. And she really doesn't address that, does she?
That's right.
You know, that people don't have access to these things. I mean, I think that her audience is a fairly elitist audience.
That's a good point. The book before, The Wild God, I don't remember, it was something The Wild God, which was kind of almost a mystical book. In fact, I wrote a blog and said, Suzy, Barbara, I don't believe you, because it was all about a kind of spirituality.
That was after the mushrooms, probably.
That's right. But Suzy's put into perspective. You're going for the mushrooms because life is hard. Anyway, well, it was a book that challenged, and it was a wake-up call to all of us. I know we've all had friends who've been overdiagnosed. I will share this. My mother had a breast cancer removed. Well, today the cancer she had, they don't even treat anymore, you know.
And then we have the opposite. My late wife was underdiagnosed. She missed a mammogram one year for she was just too busy with work. Came back and they found that it had been stage 2, and she died. So I'm reading the book thinking, well, you know, in some cases, going to get that mammogram might be a really good thing to do. So she didn't quite convince me that obviously there's lots of tests. You know, the annual exam where they listen to your lungs and, you know, hit your knee. Yeah, that's not going to tell you a whole lot. But when you have some very specific tests, I think we need to pay attention sometimes to those.
I think that her whole premise on this was she got to the point in her life where she said, well, I'm old enough to die. So how am I going to spend the rest of my life? Which, you know, I actually appreciated for its agency, I think. And a lot of people sort of give up that agency and that choice.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. Well, we have really run out of time, and we could have done Barbara much better. Maybe sample some mushrooms to really test the book's premise.
That would be a different kind of thing.
So we close for our audience. I think our audience knows that. We've been going for 4 years, by the way. We have marbles here, which we vote, and you guys have done this before. Red is for Reddit, and blue is for boo. And So we want you to evaluate for the readers, for our audience, whether this is a book you would recommend they pick up. So Dan, you started this off and drop it here and then.
So we're going to do that. I would recommend it. There's enough in it, I think, and I agree with Suzy about talking about the agency. And it was interesting and fascinating enough that even though I didn't agree with everything, I'd say it's worth the trip through that book to read it and then have some good discussions around it. So I'm going to say yes.
And isn't it wonderful to have someone talk about science in a way that you can understand it?
Yeah.
All right.
I would agree. I think that, bring on the polemic if you're going to back it up and give me something to think about.
Well, she certainly gave me something to think about, which at 82 is, the less I see a doctor, the better off I am. So yes, it's a Reddit for Barbara, my colleague from Reed College. Listen, this was fun. I wish we had more time. I wish you both good fortune on your book. And again, the title of your book, Dan, that's now and available is?
The Gods of Second Chances.
The Gods of Second Chances. I read that. I read it and I read it with a red marble. So, and Suzy, again, your book?
Well, thanks for having me. And The Moment Before is the name of my book.
The Moment Before. That sounds so romantic. All right, The Moment Before. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Consider becoming a subscriber. We don't track, we don't add. Just join us and we'll have more adventures in the future. And thank you for being a part of Just Read It.